So we're here with Craig, Luke, and Wei, and she's catching us up a little bit on what she's been doing. But Craig was just asking us some questions. So do you want to restate that, Craig? So you get we get
Yeah, well, question specifically to Wei, but other people as well. Uh, as you've become interested in magic and things, let's say spirituality in general, that is, you know, let's say not mainstream. Has that affected your relationships, or has it affected the way that people in your life think about you?
I don't, I think people have always assumed I was already more witchy than I was. Um, I was taught by my older brother that, we wear black skirts and combat boots and, band t-shirts. And so I've been, gothic looking for quite a while. So there was a lot of assumptions. And
Mm.
so I dealt with actually really bizarre instances with neighbors when I was young, like spreading rumors that I was a witch. And my husband's family still, to this day blame me for everything because I wear black, right? So, and that was before I got to where I am now, where I would say I'm more authentically living what I believe than prior to finding where I am now, right? Um, so I guess if anybody has changed their opinion, I'm already used to it.
Hmm.
I'm also always, I live in a very rural community,
Mm.
and I'm half Chinese. I don't quite look Caucasian. And so there is a little bit of outsiderness that always kind of exists for me. And my husband has realized it more now, because even though, he lives a heathen lifestyle and he has a big beard, but he can put on his baseball cap and he looks like just a good old American guy, right? And he can get the highs, how are yous, and I'll get a more reserved reaction sometimes from the same people. So in that sense too, I'm kind of like, that kind of stuff just kind of, I'm used to it a little bit. I'm already the weirdo.
It sounds like you were kind of a scapegoat or seen that way even before you were actively investigating anything that was.
Yeah, I think a female that looks slightly different and doesn't conform to the norms will tend to do that. And then being an artist, you can always go, oh well, it's just because she's an artist, right? So there are a lot of things that people will choose to explain away whatever it is that makes them uncomfortable about me. They can pick whatever it is, and then that's how they choose to see me. So um but early on, I had brothers who, one of my brothers had cystic fibrosis and passed away, and so I dealt with death pretty early. And so to me, some of those things I think maybe other 12-year-old girls would have gone through, I was not there. So I didn't care about certain things. And I did a lot of grief and hospice volunteer work in as a teenager. And so then, knowing that I was dealing with other people in grief, walking around in black clothing also became just normal garb for me. So that's that's I
Just
guess
like
I came into those roles before I got the rest of myself there.
sure.
Um,
Sometimes I regret hitting the record button. I don't want people to feel like I'm taking advantage of their of their lives or anything, or making it awkward. I don't know. So I can like cut all this out or whatever. I don't have to
no,
record.
none of
Okay.
that's
Okay.
none of that is stuff I'm ashamed to share or anything. It's just,
Yeah.
it's part of, right, how we develop in this lifetime, is the things we experience. And so,
Yeah.
unfortunately, the flip side of some of that is there's a lot of family trauma and things, and um, through finding myself and my inner strength and working some through things, I've dealt with some family trauma, and I'm able to, as a, let's just say, witch, approach this next phase of my journey with my family stronger, with more boundaries,
Yeah.
um, and knowing myself better. And therefore, I'm able to process and deal with the upcoming, I'm going to be honest, crap, because it's not going to be pretty. I mean, so like, but I had to separate myself from the main person in my family, which is my mother, that I have conflict with, and did deep shadow work and found the goddess, and and then and in a different place even from then, but it's all led me there. And oddly enough, but it's all through the fiber arts is how I got there. So back to yarn.
I was super interested in what you just said, and also especially Luke, your response to that, because when she said she found the goddess, you look like you have found the goddess as well.
Luke definitely has.
What, is that some, you're familiar with that phrase?
Oh man, honestly, I don't know. Way, I'll say this. I heard your previous conversation with Jason, and I had heard you mention something about I have no idea what sort of trauma exists in anybody's past, but I know I have my own. I know everybody has their own, and so and my my sister had excommunicated my mom at some point, and then only in the last year, I mean, and that was for a long time. I mean, probably 5 years they didn't talk with each other, and then they finally started talking with each other in the last year. But there's nothing perfect about it, and so uh it's kind of just bizarre to see them rekindle after so long, like the living different lives, and yeah, thinking they know each other when they don't know each other, and seeing the way that they um, rekindle that relationship is just interesting. But at the same time, I I just I understand uh, the way that being a black sheep, or like how do you resolve some of those tensions that might otherwise continue to fester? And is it important to resolve those tensions? I don't know.
I think it is, but I will say you can't expect the other party to be in the same place that you are.
Yeah,
And I think when you heal, you can understand that, because you're finally able to stop being angry. Because right, you've got to get to a place where you can protect yourself. Then you got to process and acknowledge, yes, you were hurt. Yes, you were let down, right? And XYZ. And you are worth the time and energy you're putting in yourself, because when you've lived in a traumatic situation long enough, it's easy enough, because especially if you've been gaslit by other people, to be the one to start to think you're the problem, you're the weak link, you're the crazy person.
yeah,
And I think when people are sensitive souls, we often get caretaker roles, especially in families.
yeah,
And so that's a role I fell into, which I shouldn't have. And the stuff that was attached to that, um, actually in my life had to go through two separate forgiveness processes for my mother. The first one as a 20-year-old and a young adult, coming to grips with my mother isn't a perfect person. And then when I had my child, and became a mother and then experienced some more failings from her, I went through this other kind of fury that like I wouldn't have understood in my 20s, because I'm in that mother phase, right? And so now I'm starting to be perimenopausal, and I'm starting to go tell my husband, in 10 years I'm officially old, this is all shut down, right? Like, so there's this new place where you start to acknowledge we're all going to make mistakes. And so now as a mother, I say, I know I'm going to do something that's going to affect my son. I just hope that when we balance all my mistakes out, we still are heavier on. My mom was mostly good, right? She mostly did her best not to fuck me up. Sorry, excuse me. But
No, you can
like,
say what.
so, and that's my attitude now, because as I'm approaching things is, we're all not perfect, and we all have a light and a dark that we're juggling daily. And my goal as a good person to other people around me is to just be better than not.
Yeah.
Right. And so what is that? The one Egyptian god that weighs our heart at when we die, right? So hopefully when my heart is weighed, it's lighter than, full of whatever regret, sin, whatever you want to,
Oh my gosh.
label it.
You bringing up the subject of like just that gravity and levity concept. I don't know. There's just a lot there because I certainly feel that.
Well, so something else that I'm doing is I'm taking a class with Dr. Peter Dushevit, and he's a calendar magician, and so we are meditating and working with the tarot, with the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. And right now we're in the Hangman week, and so we're dealing with the Hangman card. And I always feel the Hangman card is more like an Odin card for me. He, when he sacrifices himself on the world tree to gain knowledge, right? But in that, we were talking about this week the way we observe the world around us. And I have a visual spatial problem. Like, I don't, when I go to draw three-dimensional objects, I will just draw it distorted. And I had to learn to observe the negative spaces around to get an accurate depiction of the object. So if you think about that, then the things that are unseen define reality in a more real way than the actual object we're observing, right? And so the Hangman card tells us if we invert the way we look at the world and we choose to see the unseen, then do we find wisdom there? So, that's the week I'm living in right now. And the fun thing is the world syncs up around when we're in these lessons. And it's interesting. When we were working through the devil card, there's this piece of land where they've mowed down all the trees, and somebody put a devil, the inverted pinnacle on the concrete outside where they've just mowed down all these trees. And it was that same week. And, to them, they don't know that to me, that stupid little thing they spray painted up was like a major, like, holy crap moment, So, anyway, yeah,
That I
I've been
really
doing
like
a
what
lot
you
of
said
stuff.
about the negative spaces. It was
Yeah.
not where I thought you were going, but I'm really glad you did. I have a question. I suspect the three of you guys are well equipped to answer. It's a question I don't know the answer to at all. We
Oh,
talk about the spiritual world. There's spiritual entities, and maybe you want to call them a different name, but um, how do you imagine that, let's say, that spiritual world, what is its existence like relative to the physical world? How do you compare? I could say that my cup over here on the table it exists in the physical world, but I don't know that, especially people who don't talk about this kind of thing. How do you describe to someone, what is this? Where is the spiritual world? How is it related?
I have an answer, but I don't want to dominate the. So if Luke or Jason have an answer.
I'm interested to hear your answer. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think all of the realms are right here, right together, right? Have you ever listened to the discussions about the differences between 2D and 3D and 4D, and the different, and how one dimension cannot physically really see the other dimension because of the limitations that exist physically, right?
Yes.
So that's how I feel like the spirit realm, it's right here. And I have a story to illustrate that goes back to my mother and why I'm speaking to her again. And it has to do with speaking to that spirit realm and then having a physical response the following day within 24 hours. That was just like, so do you want me to tell you?
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to hear it so bad.
So I had come to a place, like I had literally the day of, I was telling my husband, like, I've come to accept that, like, I'm no contact with my mom, and I'm okay with that. Like I feel like I've healed. And then so stupid little me, I was lighting my incense, and I had decided I was gonna speak to my brother, her brother who's passed, because we're doing some ancestor work in my tarot group too. So I was like, let's talk to the ancestors, and let me just call out all of her immediate family that's deceased. And I said, I really just want her to find peace in her life. I don't have to be a part of that in order for her to find happiness, because she's in her late 70s, and if protecting my son meant she isn't going to have a relationship with him, I still wanted her to have peace. And I was sweeping the floor while I was doing it, and I threw all the trash and I put it in the trash, and I said, let this be symbolic of everything that we've been going through, that has, let this debris, let me throw this away, and lit my candle and went about my life. And then the next afternoon, a phone number calls me out of the blue, and I answer it because I don't answer numbers that say, my mother's name on it. And my mom had fallen down and hit her head, and it was her. And she was like, please come. Now, my younger brother is also physically disabled. So it's kind of like, you can't just call, my brother can't go pick her up off the floor. And she couldn't get him on the phone anyway. So I walk in, and I tell my husband, I did it. This is all my fault. I called the ancestors, and I talked to the spirits, and I did the thing with the sweeping, and now mom's on an ambulance on the way to the hospital, and we have to go see her. And then on the way down, I was kind of crying and processing a little bit, because this is me breaking that no contact. And I was like, I'm not feeling as anxious as I was. And I got this kind of calming sensation. And I got this thought in my mind that was, you are her peace, right? If I come and I mend this, this is what she needed. The 2 years away, that was her purgatory. This will be an okay thing. And so she tells me in the hospital, when I get there, she was seated, and she felt like something pushed her, and she hit her head on the countertop behind her. And when she told me she was seated and she felt pushed, I was like, it's my fault again, you know. So you know, take what you will from it.
Sure.
I talked to the spirits, and the next day I'm back in communication with her. Were these just a random set of occurrences that just pieced together in a really weird way? Do I think that, you know, the fact that I have a rich spiritual life and I called on them in a way that might have lent them to hear and
Yeah.
have an effect and bring peace? I prefer that. I like that version. That brings me peace. So I'm going to go with that.
Hmm.
So that'll be my truth in this story, right?
Hmm.
And that's
That-
okay for my version of reality.
I know what you mean. I think when you say that there's this degree of freedom that we're just not able to look in, we're not able to look at, akin to the 2D, 3D distinction. Would you be more likely to say these spiritual beings, whatever they are in the physical world, they're made out of atoms, or would you say they're somewhere else? They're made out of, you know, poetrons and spiritrons, or
You
how
know,
do people talk about this?
well, so I'm sure, have you heard of Joshua Cutchins and
No.
everybody who okay, so there's a book that just came out called The Ecology of Souls. And he is a very open-minded Christian who is exploring things like, is, you know, basically everything we're talking about right now. You know, and so there are those people, let's just take it to Bigfoot, right? Who think Bigfoot is real, but is also a incorporeal being that can phase in and out. And, you know, I don't know.
Man, I feel like where I would derail this conversation, and I hope I don't actually do that. I don't want to derail it in any direction, because I love what we're talking about. But in regard to that negative space, and I know I'm reversing because I love the story you're telling too. Like, and I thank you so much for like revealing it too. That whole thing with your mom, because I understand the synchronicity there too, where it's like like, because I understand it in the realm of even like potentially I'm performing a ritual in regards to prayer when I'm submitting some sort of supplication to whatever I'm interacting with, and then all of a sudden something transpires in material reality that is immediately tied to whatever I'm interacting with, and so I understand that connection there. But like in regards to the negative space that you were talking about earlier, and how that negative space defines whatever you're focalizing at, but also like the importance of that negative space, because if that it truly is defining what you're giving your attention to, it's almost as if that is actually just as important, if not more important. And so for me, that corresponds to the periphery, and how like we have this very vague, sort of ambiguous, sort of like it's not even within conscious reality that we're experiencing. It's not within our sensory emotion. Well, it may be within our sensory emotional space, but it's not within our discursive space of like reasoning. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that from my experience, it's very much this like vague, sort of peripheral, I guess my experience of anything supernatural outside of the material world is always within this. I can't confirm it. I can't. It's or I can, but it's not with any measure of certainty. It's with this. I don't know if you guys are tracking with what I'm saying, but it's
You're talking about the non-discursive space.
yeah, this non-discursive space, this almost like in this peripheral space, what it's coming in at the edges and it's coming in at the margins, but it's not within the focal point.
So in
Yeah.
this line, there was something my teacher said this week was, you know, if you can shift your reality to where your immortal concerns overtake your mortal concerns, right? When we decide that what happens to us afterwards is more important in our daily activity than just our getting overwhelmed and getting lost in the mundane of the day to day. It's almost like that keeps you in a stream of energy that makes those sacred events, because they are to me sacred events, they keep them more plentiful. And then the more plentiful they are, the more you're reminded of that negative space and that it exists and that it's real. And so all the little things that I do to give back to the land, or they all become sacrifices, right? And you can understand the sacrifice of a Christ figure. It's that same kind of thing, right? What are we giving up, so that we're reminded of that space that we can't see, you know? So I feed the animals every day, and I thank the land, and I offer the bird seed in the morning, and the cat food, the dry food to the crow. You know, each of those things are offerings on a daily basis, but I make them an active process that I take seriously every day. And I'm at a place now, my animals at night haven't been coming. And I'm also at a place now where I'm considering doing a more ritualistic prayer like devotional to one of the goddesses. And I feel like that's because I've made that bond and that trust with the land spirits now, and I can phase some of that activity. It's been a year. It's time to change. It's time to transition. And so I'm going to explore a new mode of ritual and see what happens.
I have a question on that. How long
Yeah.
have the animals not been coming?
Since winter has come, but last year they were present all winter, and they
Yeah.
haven't not been coming, but they haven't been as present. Like, they haven't been active up on my deck versus where, you know, like I would have pictures of them coming nightly, and I was feeding them nightly.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is I made a bond with a neighbor over these animals, and you know, like, so I've been able to share some of my thinking with him. But the animals being gone, I miss them. I do. I had 3 baby raccoons that I was, you know, making sure that they stayed 3 baby raccoons that got to grow up instead of becoming 2 and then 1.
Yeah.
And then sometimes when I haven't seen them, that's just Lulu, she's crazy. sometimes when I haven't seen them and I've put offerings out, I've said something along the lines of, I'm worried and I'd like to know that they're okay. And then I'll see like the opossum come up on the deck. And I'll take that as my, okay, they're all right. They're all right. You know, they're just not coming in the numbers that they are. But on the flip side of that, one of the goddesses I work with um, in the Druid tradition is represented by a hawk and a wren. And I feed the wrens and I have a hawk that hunts my birds, but she's always outside and I hear her. And whenever, you know, so now the way the animals are communicating has shifted based on how I'm experiencing my spirituality at the moment. I don't think I need that dark night of the soul time anymore. So my deep night animals, they're not quite as present anymore. I've
Same
come
here.
into the day and the hawk the hawk has been something that has really been showing itself, you know. And
That's really cool. I really
yeah,
enjoy
so
all
I
the
listen.
language you're using too. Like the because I was curious. The reason I asked because I had the raccoon that was coming to my door like almost every, and I haven't seen her. I think it's her in months now. And then she started coming back for months. I didn't see her. Then she started coming back very, very sporadically as well. And then now it's been a few months and I haven't seen her. But I'm just kind of trusting that she's okay. But I like the language that you use that the hawk is revealing itself almost. Like I like the way you phrase that. It's like,
Mm.
yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, when you talk about uh the the goddess, is that kind of just could other people maybe understand that as something more like the divine feminine or like Gaia or Mother Earth or something like that in a way, or
So
the spirit of Mother Earth maybe?
yeah, so for me, uh, to me there is ultimately a divine feminine energy that derives from the planet, and I call that mother. And I feel there is an energy that is skyward, and I'll attribute that to a father.
Mm-hmm.
And I treat when I meditate or I am trying to um, access that negative space, we'll just call it for this conversation. Um, I try to bridge that gap between the earth and the sky, right? So in our classes, we kind of mingle the energy into, instead of a golden light and a silver light, a mixed of the two, right? And that access is here in your heart, and that connection between those two, um, I think is that aspect of the divine getting to experience um, what we are, and we're each a different aspect of reality, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if the divine can connect to us and experience that moment of humanity, if we think about the different, if gods live on a different layer and they can connect and come down into our realm for a little while, and what are they experiencing while they're here? Do they experience pain and pleasure while they're accessing us, or
Mm.
you know what, or do we get to get some of their divine knowledge, and there's just a, you know, the way skin sloughs off when it, like, do we just trade some energy when we're accessing that place, and that's where things come from? I don't know, but that's what I'm exploring, right? And I'm just going to let things keep opening up as they do. That's what I've been doing, is just listening. And if I hear things that seem to repeat, I'll write it down, you know, and keep listening. I like to say I follow the threads, right? So if each of us is a different strand, and some strands want to come together, and so in spinning, we talk about taking a single strand, and through the act of applying twist and energy, we can apply them together to become stronger. Two is stronger than one. Three is stronger than two, right? But that twist,
Yeah.
in order to do that, when we spin a single, we give it more energy, but then we rotate back on, we come back on ourselves a little bit to release that excess energy to become two that are balanced, right? And that's
Wow.
very much yin and yang, right? It's that same symbology, and in a physical medium, you know, basically exemplifying that kind of thinking. So that's how while I, you know, when you sit and spin and you're meditating, because it is a meditative process, those are the kind of things that be like, oh, you know. So when you're crafting and you're doing something intuitive and you're accessing the creative divine spark, right?
Yeah.
Listen to some interesting podcasts and conversations, and let that kind of, you know, let the sparks build on each other, and you know, then you see the things that we don't see. So.
I have to tell you, Wei, that though my wife she doesn't spin, she's a natural dyer. So and we travel around and go to various markets with um you know, she'll use other people's creations in regards to they're creating the fiber art, but then she's dyeing it. So she has like different collaborations that she uses, but um, that's been a fun process too. And
Yeah.
so hearing the other side of it too, because there's this labor that goes into it prior to what we then receive to dye with various botanicals, most of which we're growing on our property here, but a lot of stuff we have to outsource because it just doesn't even grow in our region. Um,
But
but
isn't there such a wonderful community too that comes from that? When you're like, I have a black walnut tree, somebody come and get it, you know? And
yeah,
we come out of the woodwork, and then you're like, you're my people. We're, you know,
yeah,
and then in that, I love the inspiration that comes from that, because then we do collaborate.
yeah,
Yesterday I did a pop-up show at another fiber artist, because I'm in a group of them, and we were actually talking about natural dyes yesterday, because we were having a discussion about mordants, and when we dye in the numbers of skeins that we're dyeing,
sure,
we tend to like the environmental impact of working with acid dyes, actually, because there's no heavy metals left in the water, and we are cognizant of how much we would be disposing as indie dyers versus a hobbyist doing it on a smaller scale, right?
yeah,
Because somebody was like, oh, well, aren't natural dyes better than all of these things that you're using? And it's like, well, I provide the acid, as opposed to the natural dye is the acid. And then you have to introduce the mordant. So blah, 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 blah. But
yeah.
anyway, yeah, yeah.
No, and you're speaking a language that I only hardly know. I know, like, you know, we're using like alum, and we're using iron, and we're using all these other, like, there's a variety of other mordants that I think my wife is using, but you know, and we have indigo vats going, and all these other fermentation processes, and the cauldrons on the
Yep.
on the you know, they're always boiling, and the house is filled with fragrances, and there's stuff strung around drying and whatever else, but it's one of those things where I just I spend my time in the garden, and my wife is the one that's actually doing she's doing the alchemy. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And it is. And it's fun. I actually, in my art process, developed kind of an allergy to metals. in during photography, back when we could still use dark rooms, you know, now everybody's digital. But so I stayed away from natural dyeing and just steered towards using the acid dyes. But they also had saturation of colors that is so important to me. So they became, instead of, there was a long time I wasn't painting and doing a lot of my art because the color side of it was being satisfied by creating these richly saturated fabrics and yarns and things like that. So, you know, but yeah, it's fun. It is. It's its own magic though. And then you start stirring your cauldrons in certain ways and certain times of days, or if you want to bring in, I bring in mountain water from the Catoctin Mountain up here near me. There's a spring, and I'll rinse my yarn and with mountain spring water, and you know, does it do anything for the yarn? No. But is it something I do? Yeah. And then later on, when I'm at a show, before the show start, I'll whisper to the yarn that, you know, I made this as an act of inspiration, and now it's time to inspire people, right? Like, this is now the magic I put into you. It's time for you to wake up, you know.
Yeah.
That's actually really precious. I think that does something to the art. I would say
Yeah,
so. Yeah, definitely.
I like
I
it.
mean,
you
like you said,
undersold that.
the mother's giving you water from her spring, and you're putting it into the yarn, and then putting all your attention and care into it, and then
Yeah.
asking it to continue its life into the next person. That's really cool.
Well, and
Well,
part of the Cauldron of Creation, right? The myth of Cardowin, or I'm never gonna say her name right. Anyway, like, I can't help but when I'm stirring my dye pots to go, you know, here's this void that I'm creating this yarn and this art from. And so, you know, tap the pot a couple times and, you know, whisper thanks to her and the inspiration at that phase. And then at the rinsing phase, there's a little something, but it's that same nod to the divine or the negative space, or however we want to look at it, that it's just a little thing I do along the way. And then at the end of it, you know, does it matter to my customers that I've done that? No, but it does to me. And if that brings magic in one way or the other, you know, who's to say that magic didn't exist? So if
I'm so curious where this overlaps with like this understanding of a sacramental life, or a life because like all these like slower practices that are accustomed to this like somewhat, I mean it's a pre-modern agricraft way of living that was deeply bound to a way of knowing in the world, and encountering reality that at least in modernity we don't have anymore. And so it's like we're cut off from this whole other way of knowing. And then there's these thin strands like you're talking about, the golden thread that's sort of like running counterintuitively to the modern impulse that still is participating in these things. And I feel like I'm to a certain extent tapping into that to a certain degree. I'm seeing the sacred. Like, all I'm seeing is the difference between the reality that everything is actually sacred, and all we've done is desacralized these things. And so it's like tapping back into the reality that like everything that I'm participating in has this like sacramentality to it, you know, like whether it's feeding my chickens or whatever it is. It's like these rituals that I'm participating in on a daily basis, and they require a certain measure of suffering to partake in, but like there's a certain measure of like abundance that comes from these things. And
sacrifices, it leads to like it's a form of limitation that leads to greater knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? Because you get to experience the joy those chickens bring you, right?
Mhm.
When they're thriving and happy. There's
Mm.
nothing better than seeing your animals happy and knowing that you're taking care of them. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that in itself is that little dopamine rush to me is coming from the sacred.
Yes.
That's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's just whichever mode we need to see it. If you need to see it as Odin, good. If you need to see it as Christ, whatever, you see it, and that's the important part to me anyway.
Yeah.
Acknowledging that it exists is the real thing. So
Greg, you look like you've got a question. You don't? Okay. I couldn't tell. Yeah, I completely agree. It's sometimes when you're talking well, first of all, multiple times, this conversation is great. Multiple times I've been like, I don't know, something when you and Luke have been going back and forth, I'll get moments where it's almost like something will hit my heart and I'm just like, man, it almost makes me tear up or something. I don't know. But and then when you're talking about the the things being sacramental and stuff, sometimes it reminds me of fasting a little bit. Maybe that's just my own personal way of doing it where I'll give up. Like when you're talking about the peripherals and things like that, I was trying to talk to Luke about this a few days ago. It's almost like where that it doesn't come full center, but it's like I'm more aware of it all the time or something when I'm fasting. And it's like I mean, you could say it's like kind of for moments I'm living in a thin space or something like that, but it's not like I still feel very grounded too and very connected to earth at the same time of being, I don't know,
yeah.
in the peripheral.
Well, ceremonial magicians use fasting and abstinence and those things as cleansing rites in order to be able to perform more powerful, directed magical rites.
That sounds
I
like Jason.
definitely, huh?
I'm all about the power. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, that's what's happening though, right? You're cleansing your body through fasting.
Hmm.
And then whatever
Yeah.
you're partaking in theory, the offensive smells of certain foods and the smell of carnal activity is supposed to be repulsive to spirits and things like that. And if we're calling on them to do things for us, to have an impact in our life, if we call upon them as stinky monsters, right? They maybe don't want to lend aid. So, from a ceremonial magician standpoint, the things that monks and clerics have been doing as acts of devotion, also, in their realm, it has a practical application to it. So, and again, it's like whichever way you choose to see that act, are you choosing to see it as something cleansing so you don't offend the spirits, or is it something cleansing to make you less unclean and therefore, or is it as simple as, well, you don't want to go to somebody's house and ask them for a favor if you haven't taken a bath and, just show up clean and respectful. I mean, how do you want to interpret that? Are any of those interpretations wrong?
Yeah.
All of
Yeah.
the above.
It reminds me a little bit when you were talking about because I see it the same way too, as like Mother Earth, Father Heavens, and if for some reason when you're just describing the fasting, my mind, and this could be weird that I don't know if it was right for my mind to jump over here, but I was thinking about back a little bit ago, you mentioned something about the shedding of skin. And that kind of seems, there's a connection between like realizing we're made of both heaven and earth. And there's this weird sort of shedding of skin, I guess, that happens in the process too. Um, you're shedding that layer of clay, I guess, that you've kind of like you said, is more.
Yeah. And the
I don't want
body
to say
naturally
unclean, but yeah.
recycles all the cells at every 7 years, right? So, um, you know, so does that, you could say, is there some sort of spiritual cycle you could link yourself up to, a 7 year devotional journey? Like, who's to say? The druids follow the moon cycle, and it's a 19-year journey, the moon, to come back to its full starting point, let's say. And you can't, you have to experience every phase of the moon along the way of those 19 years. So, right, so all of these things,
You're in
they
for the
seem
long haul.
mundane, but you can't, you see how the layers of things can start
Mhm.
fitting together, and so something as simple as tending a garden, you're tending a piece of land, and if you communicate with the spirits of that land and say, I sacrifice my time and energy to create a safe place for you, and then, what does that do? That's kind of where I'm like, what happens if I then? So I love that kind of if then. Let's do some scientific method on the unknown spiritual realm.
Yeah.
Wei, you've mentioned the ceremonial magicians, you've mentioned the calendar magicians and the druids. What are the categories of magicians that you encounter commonly, and what distinguishes them?
Um, so my calendar magician would tell you that in a past life he thinks he was a druid, right? So the aspects of druidry just exist and make sense to him, even though he doesn't really actively call upon them in this life, right? So I'm encountering what kind of reveals itself as I continue to pick my way through this process. So I don't do anything ceremonially. I guess I would be classified more as a folk magic kind of practitioner. But I can see the validity in ceremonial magic. There's a lot more time and energy and effort that goes into it.
Mhm.
And as a mother, I don't have that time and energy, right? Like
What is ceremonial magic?
so ceremonial magic is going to be more of like, if you hear people refer to as like the Gardnerian stuff, or what is it, the Aleister Crowley's gang, and
Like, is that kind of like, I mean, Solomonic magic would fall into that, things like that.
all of those
Um,
things,
kind of
right?
what people would maybe say is more like high magic or something like
Yes,
that. Yeah.
exactly.
Calling
Right.
on angels, things like that.
Mhm.
Okay.
My question to follow that is, would you be following a particular grimoire, or is folk magic more an intuitive? I don't even know. I guess I'm speaking out of turn, maybe.
I would say my journey into folk magic has been intuitively led.
Yeah.
And in that act, my sketchbooks have become grimoires, right? And all a grimoire is just, right, it's knowledge comprised into one place you can go back to. So as I'm meditating, it goes in the book. As I am in my classes on certain things, all of those things go in the book. And then now there's several books, right? So I'll just have piles and piles of it, but it's art, right? So because things don't always translate themselves so well with me through written word, I'm gonna have like paintings that go along with things that are gonna be the way, because sometimes I can't write down what I'm experiencing, right? How do you describe that the moon and the clouds suddenly turned into a face, right? That looked like a female, a motherly female shining down on me. I've experienced that twice. And the first time is when I was going through the heartbreak of having to deal with that mother transition and re-understanding my mother. And then to have felt a maternal, loving, feminine energy when I needed a mother energy. That sold me more than anything that I had experienced before that, right?
Yeah.
And so that became a truth that I then knew, and then that began to alter my reality, right? Because I started to see things outside of the way I've been programmed to see things. And then there's a point where you know, people will talk about deprogramming, but it is, right? You stop seeing everything through one particular lens, and then you realize there's so much more, and that the restrictions that we're imposing are all self-imposed, right? When I decide to classify you as X and you as Y, right, what purpose is that serving?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if we're all here to kind of learn a lesson and experience the divine in some way and learn more through those experiences, I think when we all start trying to segment us up and classify us just so you take away from that and you dehumanize us all, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we can't be human to each other.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't like in this world is that that's something that I think we're losing, is we're losing that connection to each other, as we're all here living together, experiencing this world together. We're all going to make mistakes because that's part of learning. You know, we can't say your experience is less valid than mine because yours isn't mine.
Oh man.
You just can't.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because it well, it acknowledges the particularity of each and every person's experience, not only of the material realm that they're living in or what have you, but their experience of the divine, and of the that which they cannot actually bring into any sort of communicable experience, or like, so that which remains tacit, that which remains like that which we cannot speak of, that which almost fails the minute that we even conceptualize it, like the very fact that you can capture what you're experiencing with the clouds and the moon in a piece of artwork is a perfect example of this, because you're able to bring this sensory emotional experience of material reality, but it is also the experience of um, what have you. I'm going to use the word divine into that experience. So it's like this hypostatic union between heaven and earth, and you're trying to put this into into um, into this particularity, into this multiplicity, and in each and every formation of that in our lives is so unique.
Mhm.
It's like it's so and it's so precious to each one of us. So it's like it just can't be taken away ever, you know, from each and every person.
Mhm.
And there's a kind of like sovereignty there, even in that element, in that experience. I don't know if it like sovereignty of the individual. Maybe that's like that sounds like a weird way of saying it, but there is that reality there. But it doesn't deny the collective reality of that sovereignty either. So I don't know.
That's the balance in it too, isn't it? Right.
Yeah.
In order for there to be a collective, we have to be individuals.
Yeah. That coincidence of opposites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's if from, let's look at the universe, right? That's how it ultimately balances itself out. And so all those things, I don't know, they apply
Yeah.
to how we look at all this stuff.
Yeah.
Naturally, it seems like. But
Yeah. Yeah. It's just the power of that, the way that experience, um, however, however the, however you do experience that, I'm having trouble articulating myself, so I might as well actually stop talking.
no, I get what you're
But
saying, right? Because if you're a
yeah,
musician, it's gonna come to you through your music.
yeah,
If you're a woodworker, it's gonna come to you through your carpentry,
yeah,
right? We have to find the things that bring us joy in order for us, I think, to be able to let inspiration find us, right? And for me, inspiration comes from divine energy. So, and that spark comes from the void, that place of nothingness, right? And that's what divine energy, inspiration is. So, but that spark is nothing without us, the conduit that brings it into reality. We manifest it by creating the objects, right? And so when you channel and focus that energy while you're creating those objects, it's even more those magical tools that you create, right? So when I spin yarn of protection for my friend, right, and then they go and create a protective sigil with the yarn that I spun, you know, it just builds on itself.
I feel like I'm dominating questions and conversation, but do you believe what is a? I'm very curious what that intentionality um, brings, because like there's so much preparation. Even I mean, you're talking as someone who practices folk magic, and I understand that even a more ritualized or ceremonial magic would be even more intention potentially. But
Mhm.
at the same time, like that intention that you're putting into that. Um, well, I don't know what you'd call it, whatever.
Active creation.
Yeah, active creation is what does intentionality have? I feel like that's a lot of what I understand as both immediately obvious to me in regards to thinking about magic, but also like foreign to me because of perhaps my upbringing, like because I approach it from like the avenue of like I'm realizing the continuity between prayer and supplications and that sort of thing, and what I'm seeing even within the practice of magic. And
Well, replace prayer with intention.
yeah,
I mean, what is prayer? But you're focusing your mind on something that is important to you, and you're putting that energy into the request, whatever it is you're beseeching, right? So do thing when you're creating, right?
for
But
instance,
have that intention behind it. Is that prayer?
when I pray, I I notice the difference between prayers that I actually incantate with my breath and
Mhm.
I speak out loud, and not only do I have the auditory, like I'm incorporating all my senses in that act versus like um a prayer that I might speak within my own mind, or and it's lost so quickly because I'm not participating in this like ritualized process that actually includes embodiment, you know.
Can I make the observation too that the act of speaking it out loud uses breath, and breath is the thing that defines us as living beings? So there's power in that spoken word,
Yeah.
right?
Dropped a bomb right there.
Even if you're whispering it, right? So that's, I mean, I'm not out there so my neighbors can hear me. I'm whispering, under my breath, and my favorite time to pray, if I'm going to pray, right, if we look at it that way, is when the wind is blowing. And I like to go outside and speak it into the wind, right? So maybe it hits the God's ears faster if the wind brings it to them. And to me, the wind is as alive as that prayer that I'm whispering out loud is.
Yeah. You just drew a thread through all three: the spirit, the breath, and the wind. Yeah.
Mm.
And that's what comes from our being. That's how we express it. Your thoughts come out through your breath, and then it's same as wind. Yeah.
Right, which is why when you say something to somebody that's hurtful, you can't take it back. Versus you've thought something spiteful, but you've said it, you can't unsay those things you've said.
Yeah.
So, but as we grow up, when we mature, we learn to be mindful of the things we say, because we learn that there is power behind it.
Yeah.
So absolutely, that whispered prayer is more powerful than, so imagine what a shouted one, or one that's repeated and chanted with drumming and energy building, right? That's what the ceremonial magicians are doing. They're saying, okay, I want to open a door and make something happen, as opposed to, I'll just let the wind and fate be the factors. But to me, I like fate, and that fate can maybe change. And so I don't mind that it's a little more unpredictable. I'd rather go with the flow of the ocean tides than demand that the spirits listen to me. But that's because I think that's more polite.
Yeah.
And so that's the way I will approach the spirits. Who am I to demand anything?
That's, oh my gosh. This whole conversation has just been it's been blowing my mind. But I feel the exact same way. Like for so long I've demanded, like certain things, and I've wanted these, like, and then your ego gets involved and all that, and it's just like, that's when it goes off the rails. Like, it's just not gonna,
You
that's not gonna
turn
actually
into a
happen.
toddler, right? And you don't mean to.
Yeah.
I wanted it, and I asked you for it, right? And I did the things, right?
Yeah.
You said if I ate a bite of dinner, I could have a cookie afterwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but you don't always get the cookie.
And sometimes the hawk flies down and takes your cookie away right as you go to grab it.
Yeah. But for me, I go, well, maybe that hawk knew that I didn't need that particular cookie.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's where I'll go back to letting nature tell me, as opposed to, well, I wanted that cookie, and because I wanted it, all other needs and things exclude because and that's not what we're here for, right?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you believe that potentially the more authentic, potentially even more powerful spirit or spirits reveal themselves not through any sort of force or like they don't assert themselves in the same way that like perhaps even lesser spirits. I don't even know how to explain, or maybe I'm using the wrong language, but what I'm trying to say is like there seems to be something really authentic and really genuine. And specifically, I'm relating this all to this idea of the feminine and the divine feminine in my own mind, and how like that my understanding or my experience of the divine feminine has been this like it's like though the power is there, she almost is waiting for me to discover her in a way that's like uh, that waiting for me to discover her has been more powerful than me um like that's had a more powerful effect on me than uh any sort of masculine assertion. I
You know,
guess.
you think about a mother that's teaching a lesson, right? It doesn't help if I always feed my son, right? I am taking care of him, but I'm also not teaching him to take care of himself, right? And I feel like that's kind of how, for me, like that's why the listening and the sacrifices are those reminders that keep me looking for those things that come from the divine that say, hey, you know, because the more you pay attention to it, the more it's present, and then it's easier to communicate. If
Mm,
you're ignoring signs or you aren't putting them together, then the messages that are being shared with you aren't coming through, right? And I can tell you to drink water because it's good for you, but you have to do it yourself, right? So if you don't drink water and you go dry and become parched and are brittle inside, well, whose fault is that, right?
yeah. Yeah.
And
So
that's how I feel like that's the god, like goddess energy is very nurturing, but it's also not coddling.
yeah, it
There is that
demands.
severity that mothers
Yeah.
have, because sometimes you need
Yeah.
that's
And
I love you, but
it draws forth from you. Like
Mm.
it demands from you. It brings you into a new state of consciousness, you know.
Mhm. Well, and then you got to think, okay, I'll go back to my cauldron of creation and the womb of the earth, right? And if those divine sparks come from the womb and the void, um, you know, but there has to be two, right? If we have that male energy, it's important. But that male, unfortunately, and I'm sorry for splitting it into male and female, but um, those two aspects each have a benefit, right? and and a father's energy isn't the same necessarily. Even
Yeah.
a father who is taking on a caretaker role is slightly different than a mother in a caretaker role. It's just kind of the way it is. Mothers gave birth to you. Father never will know what it is like to grow another life inside of you. You don't get to experience that, unfortunately. um
Let alone
and
labor to birth that into existence.
right, our concept of pain is on a wholly different level than men's concept of pain, you know. um and and women themselves often don't realize that until they've gone through that transformative process. There's when you hear your baby make a sound for the very first time, there was a lightning bolt that went through my body, because even though I was on the C-section table, like I there it was something when my son's voice came out that first time. And um I can't describe it other than a lightning bolt, you know. And
Wow.
I'm sure my husband felt something, but I know mine was unique because I I grew him, right? And there's an ownership to that that, you know, I don't want to take that away from fathers either, but you know, there you provided the seed and we're grateful for it, but we were the vessel for it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It took from our bodies. It changed our bodies. Our bodies are eternally affected by the act of growing that child and giving birth to that child. You know, in a way you guys don't get to experience. So
Yeah.
I definitely would identify female goddess energy as something different
Hmm.
inherently.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would as
That
well.
answers my question. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I've just been like,
No, just everything you just said is like one of those moments where you're just like, man, I don't know. You just want to sit with it for a minute, you know? It
Yeah.
was just very, very precious and very profound. And it just like we have this word that keeps coming up in our little circle where fractal, like it works fractally, and everything you just said, it's just like it it hits on every single level from the micro to the macro, and even you talking about Mother Earth and how your body has changed through all this stuff and giving birth to the seed that's provided, and even how that applies all the way up on all the way to larger scales, and you see even to Mother Earth or the goddess feminine energy you're talking about is gives and gives to give life for the seed that's provided. I don't know.
yeah. Well, I mean, like I live in constant pain because the the swelling that I experienced after giving birth to my son, my lungs were filling with fluid because they were pressuring me to breastfeed, and unfortunately, I couldn't the way I couldn't produce enough milk, and the level of fluids my body was retaining versus the milk I was producing, it became dangerous. And you know, and then there was some nerve damage that happened to my feet. And so now I'm permanently affected. And I'm also in a strange place that I know if I have another child, I might not make it, or it'll be very, very bad for me physically. So my baby boy is precious in more than one way, you know. He's the only one that I'm gonna have, and so you know we channel all of our energy into him. But I also wouldn't change the things that I've had to endure to have him,
Mm.
right? And as a mother, I know that that sacrifice was absolutely worth it because I wouldn't have him. And you know, so each of these acts that we do, that it's so that fractal thing, right? It's all the same concepts, whether we're creating art or we're creating life, um, or we're giving life to our friends and our neighbors through love and compassion. Like it's all the same stuff. Just how do we look at it? And if we figure out that it's all the same, everything that we do can be a sacred act, and it can be small, but the fact that we're doing it is just bringing us back again into that place where we're in it. I don't know. So that's where I've been the last 9 months,
It's awesome.
figuring this stuff out. So
I can see you guys have some questions. Craig, you got one?
I do have questions. I'm approaching the end of my available time, so I should be
Get him in
short
there.
order. Well,
Ask some questions if you got them. I have a few, but I feel like
I
this
do too.
conversation's on like this really good, meaningful level, and I'm like, my questions are very, very
We
odd
can
and
go
off,
back to brass tacks.
So I'll ask those. I'll ask those later. You go ahead, Craig. You go first.
I don't know that I can ask anything that's gonna be able to be answered shortly, so maybe I'll jump off and let you guys stay on.
What do you want? Would you want to save it for another time, or would you want to ask it and then
I
listen
would love
later?
to.
Or- Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna
All
have
right.
to. I'm gonna
Write
have
it
to
down.
listen to this again, and I suspect some of the things that I'm curious about have answers in here that I just didn't apprehend. So anyway, it was really good to talk with you guys, and Wei,
Yeah,
it was
it
very
was
nice to meet you.
lovely. Yeah, and anytime you want to talk again, just I'm happy to.
You got it.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you, Craig.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Good
night.
night, Craig. Thanks for coming.
Jason,
So-
you first.
My question's you're gonna hear it, and then you're gonna be like, "Why are you asking this question?" All right. So when you were talking way about folk magic and stuff, I'm kind of interested in that as well. It's interesting how that does seem to a lot of times happen intuitively, and then somehow line up. You find like, oh, I did the same thing. Like when you're talking about the moon and everything, I'm just like, man, I feel like I've had those exact same experiences just from not even like looking it up or trying to Google things online, literally just really through something like prayer and some sort of seeking or desire coming from within, and then literally just kind of calling out to God, to the universe, and then having these synchronicities line up after that. And I'd mentioned that before to Luke and stuff. I had this, there's at least a span of at least a month where all I know how to describe is that every time I look in the sky, I could have swore the moon was full. And I'm like, I know that's not possible, but it was
Right.
like, and then through that process, I stopped calling the moon it, like I call it her or she or something. And it's like you get this weird transformative things. So anyways, that's I guess neither here nor there. But the whole idea of folk magic and just kind of being in tune with the earth and being explorative and everything with that. So here's my question, and it's gonna be really sideways. What is stump water? Have you heard of this before?
Stump water? No.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Okay.
assume it's water from a stump.
Yeah, it is. It is. But I think it has something to do with folk magic and how it collects in the stump, and the stump is like a vessel that holds it, like kind of like a sacred vessel. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that. So
Well, to me, it's going to be sacred because it's going to be full of tardigrades and all those wonderful creatures that exist on a microcosm that, and they're living in their own little sense of reality that we can't even imagine. And it's a unique world inside of the stump. So that's what stump water would be to
beautiful.
me. Just knee jerk.
That's beautiful. I'm glad you just took my question and just like elevated it back up to here. That's great.
Yeah. That's so playful too, because it's like so how much time have I spent just imagining the like microcosms of these different worlds? Like when you watch ants just like forming a colony in your backyard and they're living their own, like how often do you think about these things? Like I
Yeah.
don't know, for me it is pretty constant, but you get wrapped up in the mundane of everyday reality.
No, but I'm in my fish room. So I'm surrounded by micro ecosystems.
Yes.
And I keep all of the tanks I keep are minimally filtered. So it's all plant-based filtering. And
Yeah.
so upstairs in my window on one of my altars, I have a fish tank that is 100% naturally. It's just, I've got one sponge filter to keep the surface of the water moving. And it's all plants, including, my pathos are removing nitrogen for the water, blah, blah, blah. I've got small shrimp in there that are cleaning the tank. But I take that water and will water the plants from my altar with that water. And it is the living source of sacred water that I have at my disposal. But so stump water could be very much a living source of water, right? Because it has an ecosystem within it. And so that's the same thing I'm doing with my fish tanks is I'm taking that, and the act of loving and caring for and devoting a moment to them in a sacred way, then to me it's that's 10 gallons of holy water I've got upstairs, right?
Yeah.
So yep.
Yeah, I have a confession to make too. I
Mm.
actually did drink stump water once because I was curious, and I didn't really get a good vibe afterwards. I was like, I probably should not have done this. This is probably not smart.
Yeah, they're microbes you might not have wanted in there. You know,
It's all right. I'm still alive
Yeah.
right now.
that's all that matters.
I was kind of curious. I was like, I wonder what happened if I drank this water. But then as soon as I drank it, I was like, shit, I don't think that was smart. Not even for it was weird because it wasn't even like a weird like materialistic way that rubbed me the wrong way. It was just kind of this weird like you don't know
That
what you're
wasn't for
doing.
you.
Yeah.
Wasn't for you.
That's it felt like a bad omen almost. Like it more than like getting a worm or something was the least of my worries. It was just
Did
kind of
you
like you
ask?
should not have.
Did you ask for permission to drink the water?
Oh gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm running around doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm walking around and I'm like, oh, this thing on this plant looks like it could be interesting to eat. Let's try it. And then I'm like, oh, that was a bad persimmon. I didn't know what that was in my mouth.
No,
Is like,
so our
oh,
ancestors did all that work for us, so you don't
Yeah.
have to do it anymore.
I gotta actually ask the ancestors and the fairies before I go around drinking stump water.
But
Get
yeah,
myself in trouble.
what if that was somebody's secret medicinal brew and you just went on slurping it up?
It wasn't very much. I'm sorry.
It was only one shot.
It was just, no, it was
But-
less than that. It
but
was like
on
maybe
whose
like a small
perspective?
drop.
If
That's
you're
true.
this big, that
Who
could
knows?
have been the year's supply. How
This
dare
reminds
you?
me of like Horton Hears a Who, and I just drank a bunch of them. And, oh no, I'm a monster.
You weren't thinking fractally enough. How can you
And
claim to be
right.
fractal Jason?
Right.
Come on.
oh my gosh, I repent.
Oh,
Oh man.
here's my question. When I hear is it the creation cauldron or cauldron creation?
Cauldron of Creation.
Cauldron of Creation. So for whatever reason, obviously I'm thinking of like herbal medicine and medicinal. I'm thinking of like the mixtures of things. And I do have an herbal remedy book in here that it's not just herbs. I mean, it's all sorts of, whether it be minerals or mineral compounds, or whether it be, and that could come from an animal or it could come from the earth. I really like it. I haven't practiced a ton of herbal healing methods or anything like that, so I don't know. But my immediate thought was that's the relation to the cauldron that that's the image I'm getting right now.
So the tale is, Lulu, I love you. So there was a witch who was ageless, and I'm not a bard, so I'm not going to tell this the way a bard should. And I would encourage you to go look up the tale of Taliesin and listen to a real bard tell it. But essentially, Ceridwen the witch, who has all this knowledge of herbs and the cycles of the earth. She has 2 children, and one is a beautiful girl. She's sweet, everything that you could want. Her son is dumb. He's not smart. He's ugly. He's twisted. He's gnarled. And she said, this isn't going to be good for him. So what do we need to do? If he's smart, people will listen to him. So she decides that she's got to brew a potion, and it takes all of her knowledge, and it's going to take a year and a day to brew this potion. And she has 2 servants. One is an old man, and that old man, his only job is to stir the cauldron. And then there's a young boy named Guion Bach, and he is supposed to go out and he's supposed to collect the kindling and keep the fire going so that cauldron can continue to cook for that year and that day. And so we're getting towards the end, and the old man gets tired, and Guion is supposed to take over stirring. But how is he supposed to stir the pot and go collect the branches at the same time? So he's trying to do these things. And then all of a sudden, 3 drops spring forth from the cauldron, and they land on his thumb, and he puts them in his mouth. And then he knows that he's messed up. Those were the 3 drops that were meant for her son. And Cardawin knows immediately that this has happened.
This
and
is
the
my stump
cauldron,
water. This is the stump
it
water
is your
story.
stump
Oh
water.
no. What have I
So
done?
then the cauldron breaks because everything that's left is poison, and it seeps into the earth. And he knows that she's mad and she's coming for him. And he thinks, if only I could turn into a hare. And that's what he does. And he immediately, because now he has all the wisdom of the universe, he knows he's been every animal through time. And so he turns into a hare. Well, she turns into a greyhound, and she goes after him. And then while he's going and he's in the hare form, he turns into a fish, and she turns into a no, he turns into a salmon, and she turns into the otter to come after him. And then he turns into the wren, and she turns into the hawk to go after him. And then his final incarnation is he turns into a grain, and he falls into a field of grains. So she turns into the hen, and she pecks and she pecks until she consumes him. And then she's, yes, I've killed him. He's gone. He's dead. But then she knows that he's growing inside her belly. And so for 9 months, she carries him. And then she's going to kill him as soon as she gives birth to him. But then she gives birth to this beautiful child. And she can't kill something that's her own. So she makes this bundle up, and she puts him inside the bundle, very much like the Moses story, and sends him down the river. And some people say he was drifting for 40 years. Some people say he was drifting for 100 years. But a fisherman found him, and when they opened it up, he had glowing eyes, and he was Taliesin of shining brow. And he became the bard of the bardic traditions, right? That told the tales of, but when we look at what bardship is, right? It's that oral tradition and inspiring inspiration. And then that inspiration kept learning alive, right? Kept traditions alive. And lost information was most likely kept alive through those told stories. But that's what that cauldron is, and that's what it means, right? So that ultimate knowledge sprang forth from that cauldron. But she is the one who crafted it, right?
Yeah.
She knew how the earth and the seasons, and you had to collect things under the moon at just the right time. And with all of that knowledge of the natural world, she was able to create that potion.
That is
So,
really cool. That is a
yeah.
beautiful story.
I love it.
When did you learn that? Was that just recently, this year?
How did I find it? Oh, it was one of my meditations, actually, I was doing with my tarot group. And we do something called Magic Mondays, where we deliberately do acts of magic with our tarot. And we were asking questions and writing down the answers that as we got them, however they were, intuitively, right? So scrying, channeling, whatever. Anyway, her name popped up, and I wrote it down, and also something that was like, I'll know things are, the divine is communicating to me through animals. So anyway, I wrote it down, and then I followed the thread, and then I, you know, was I listened to it and was like, oh my, like all of these things just, so
Yeah.
it landed in my path, and I listened.
That's such a
So
beautiful story. That's so cool.
I love
There's,
it.
yeah,
And listening to a real bard tell it, so much better than
yeah,
me.
that's cool. I love how you were talking about too, the bard preserves like the gosh, it's hard to even describe like everything that the bard's responsibility actually preserves because it's like you take poetic form and you're keeping that alive along with incorporating it into song and then even through the music like the breath along with the vibrations of the music and the sounds and everything it really can transform an entire atmosphere like I mean songs just do that in general like you can make your day gloomy or brighter by if you
Yeah,
listen to
but
the right
if
song.
somebody has that voice that resonates and harmonizes with the music, and you get that chill, right?
Mhm.
That only comes from that kind of thing. And that's
Yeah,
that's the magic of the bard, I think.
yeah, yeah, that's true. It reminds me of Orpheus a little bit too. He's one of my favorites in the Greek
Mhm.
mythology. That yeah, it's really cool. And there was a when you were talking about the her making the cauldron and all of that knowledge going into it. I might have brought him up before last time. Have you heard of George MacDonald?
Mm-mm.
He's got this he's this kind of a Scottish he's Scottish author. He writes fantasy stories. I think he kind of inspired at least some of Tolkien and a lot of C.S. Lewis's work and stuff like that. But he's got this one story. It's called The Golden Key, and it's really beautiful story. But I think it's interesting because it reads like a kid's story almost, and
Mhm.
it's a short story. It's not very long, but it's I think it was one of his last works. But at the end of it, there's this I don't know. Now I don't want to spoil it or whatever. There's this part where
I'll have to go look it
there's
up.
yeah, there's two figures. There's a boy and a girl in it, and yeah, and it some of what you were saying where it's they make like they're taking a journey together, but there's a part where like they kind of have to go their separate ways. But her journey kind of reminded me like it for some reason it came to my mind when you were talking about the cauldron and the all the that the feminine brings or had that the divine feminine has to go through and brings to the cauldron and creates the cauldron and all that knowledge. And it's perfect that it's a cauldron too, because like you were talking about, it's a vessel for containing all those
Mhm.
things. Like that's what the feminine is, and like you carrying your
Fractals.
son, and yeah, yeah, all that stuff, yeah. And
Yeah.
the stop water. Oh my gosh, I gotta go pray some more. My goodness.
Now you need to go put some water in a stump.
Yeah, give it back.
Humbly apologize.
Yeah,
Just a thimbleful of rainwater will do.
yeah. Yeah, it was weird. It wasn't even because I wouldn't have even like bothered drinking it if I was worried about or the getting like a worm or something. And it was only like a tiny bit, like maybe, yeah, like a few drops in my hand. But then afterwards it was just like, what have you done? Like it
Yeah.
was weird, kind of, yeah, weird. Like you don't know what you're doing. Like stop. You don't get into this. I can't really describe it, but yeah,
No,
I
I
don't know.
get it. I get
Yeah,
it.
yeah, sure. But yeah, you kind of answered my one. I had another question too, but I think you kind of answered it in the story a little bit too. But you were talking about the hawk and the wren, and you said that's
Mhm.
been very symbolic for you lately.
Yeah,
Is it?
I have a little wren um that comes and eats in the morning, and I can open the door and I'll be out there, and the hawk is always calling. Like there is always a hawk nearby. And as silly as it sounds, whenever I'm driving the car, the side of the road I'm on, I will see a hawk just sitting on the road. And you know
Mhm.
my morning drive, oftentimes I'll go get coffee before my husband's awake for him and stuff, and I'll see her on one side of the road and then be coming home, and then she'll be on the other side of the road when I'm coming back,
Yeah.
and she might have just moved, but the fact that it happens consistently, it's a small little thing. And, and if I'm having a bad day and I look up and I see that hawk, I feel like the goddess in whatever form is at least with me, right? Like,
Mhm.
and then that reminds me of that maternal feeling that I had when I needed it. And like it can bring a tear to my eye because it reminds me that something else out there loves me.
Yeah.
So like whatever it is, however it's showing itself, I'll
Yeah.
take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it brings me peace. So there, right?
Yeah. That's really good. That's what, yeah, I think a lot of us, myself included, it's hard to stay aware of those synchronicities. I guess you would call them synchronicities. I mean, you call them lots of things, but they're almost like you said, uh, they're like gifts or something. And I liked how you used the word earlier. You said revealing, like it's like the hawk's revealing itself. But there's also something. It's almost to me, it's almost kind of, uh, gosh, foolish isn't the right word at all. I'm trying to think. It'd be, I don't know, it would be almost wrong to dismiss those things. 'Cause it's like something's drawing your attention at that moment too, to actually notice
Yeah,
the hawk, because I mean, you could be doing a million other things or not, then, but the fact that
right.
you're there to see the hawk and the hawk is there to reveal itself to you, um, that's really
Well,
special.
and that's the thing, right? When I was saying that we become concerned with the immortal things versus the mortal things, right? Because we can get so caught up in the day-to-day struggles that why bother looking for the hawk? You
Yeah.
know, why scan the horizon and look for what birds are flying, right? What do birds mean at all? You know, but for me, if I was told things will communicate through the animals, and then I observe the animals, and then for some reason I get things from it. To somebody else, if I were to describe that, they might look at me like it's silly, right? And it's comfortable to talk about these things with people who can reciprocate the place that I'm coming from. But just anybody on the street, they're going to be like, what are you going on about? Right?
Yeah.
That's silliness. It's silliness. But that silliness, when you start to see how many times it folds back on itself, or you're like, is it really silliness now?
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was
You
about.
know?
That was the word I almost used, where I was like, it would be silly to not pay attention to it. Yeah, when you start to see it fold back on itself, it's like it'd be more silly to not actually pay attention to this and listen to whatever this is trying to communicate. Because
Right.
yeah.
And in science, we observe patterns, right? And if
Hmm.
patterns repeat, well, then there's something going on there.
Yeah.
Well,
Y-
what is synchronicities other than a pattern that you're noticing repeating itself in a weird way, right?
Yeah.
So, you know,
And you could go
but
outside and look for the hawk uh all year long and not see a hawk. And the fact that it's showing up every day is
right.
quite
But the
quite
fact,
profound.
like, I- I've opened my front door and she's dive bombed and taken a bird right as I've been opening the front door, and it's hard not to be like, yeah, okay, I saw that, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, or I'll come out and I'll see that there's bird feathers all over the deck, and I know she's gotten somebody, and I'll take one of those feathers and I'll put it on my altar, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
because even though I'm feeding the small birds, I'm inevitably feeding her as well. And, you know,
Yeah.
and if the goddess is present as the wren and as the hawk, well, then I'm taking care of both aspects of her
Wow.
when I'm leaving those offerings, right?
Yeah. That's really cool. I feel like you have a different way of even seeing it and conceptualizing it than I do, because my mind is still, I guess, and sometimes I get stuck here. but I still like, I feel like I'm breaking it up where I'm thinking of Hawk, Hawk and Ren, Hawk and like they're divided or something, and you're seeing them all as connected in a very,
Well, because if we think about it as when he got that drop of knowledge, he realized he's been every animal,
yeah, okay,
right? So she could be the wren, but in that moment she needs to be the hawk to take the wren, right?
yeah,
But she could be any of those aspects. She could be any of the animals, just as he realized he's been all of the things and none of those things, right? That's what that ultimate knowledge is. And it's that understanding of the unknown all of a sudden, right? And then because he knew those unknown things, he was able to effect a physical transformation and transform into the creature that he thought of, right?
yeah,
But then he was eaten and consumed and transformed yet again inside her womb, who was supposed to be his foe, but ultimately, in a way, becomes his mother, and she gives birth to his purest form. And then he inspires, the Welsh nation. They have a bardic tradition to this day.
wow, that's cool.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah.
That's really cool.
You should totally. They have like competitions yearly. Still, like
Wow, that's cool.
it's important to the culture, and and it's just another aspect of you know uh, um the differences that existed on such a small piece of land. you know the Welsh, the Irish, the English, they've all got similar stories, but they're also very separate and very distinct traditions, um which I also think is just so fascinating. And then I like to look between, what are the commonalities and the patterns that repeat between the three?
Yeah,
Those must be truths,
yeah,
I suspect.
same here. Yeah, yeah. That's why even with Christianity too, you notice similarities. Like even when you were talking about all this, um, just everything in general. I grew up in, I think I probably mentioned this before, but I grew up in like Protestant charismatic circles, and so you can see similarities in a lot of different areas with things like
Yeah.
that. And I know we mentioned this before, like even with the spinning in the yarn and making, and then you have prayer cloths and Christian
Well,
charismatic
I
circles
think
too.
now I've really do. I see the same magic and power in the church. I mean, what even a baptism is a ritual.
Yeah,
It's a magical ritual. It's a Christian magical
yeah,
ritual,
yeah,
right? And one would say, if you're a Christian, it's one of the most powerful ones, right? That's the one you need to have happen. Um, but if you tell a Christian that, who's afraid of the word magic because they've been taught that the word magic is evil, but the magic is present in the acts that they're doing, you know,
mhm,
and it's to the divine, however you want to interpret it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's the same. We're doing the same stuff. So now I can say I'm spiritual and I have an active spiritual life. And I feel like if I were to encounter a Christian who has an active spiritual life, right, that we would find more in common with each other if we actually sat down and talked
uh-huh,
than
yeah,
just knee jerk putting us into a category.
yeah. I definitely agree. And even when Christians will say, um, God is love, like that's how they'll describe God. And I'm like, even if you're praying, if a Christian is praying or praying over a cloth, asking divine love to embody that cloth, I'm like, how is that different from what you're doing? Like it's the
That's
same,
magic.
yeah, it's the same thing that
Yeah.
you do and most people do. Yeah. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
if you're praying that you're wanting to put a curse in the cloth, well, that's totally different. That we're not doing the same thing. But yeah, I'm like, it is
Right.
still
Well, it's
magic. It's
still
still
magic.
magic. Yeah,
It's still magic. But it's what you don't want to put negative energy into things, right? If that's not the goal, but unless it is. But
Yeah, then you gotta be worried
but
about
it's
karma at
that
that point.
it's that lifting the veil, right?
Yeah.
And learning to see what we couldn't see, and that's that it's the same.
Yeah.
It's all the same.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I don't know if Luke's coming back or
mhm,
not.
it's okay.
But
Maybe kid things happened.
I think so. I'm
Yeah.
assuming his son woke up,
Yeah.
Sunny. His son Sunny. But yeah, but I can let you go though. If you'd be up for it, I'd love to do this again sometime. So
Oh yeah, anytime.
all
Just
right, cool. This is so
message
much
me.
fun. I love
Yeah,
talking to you about
or
all.
let's say, let's see where I am 6 months from now or something.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I
But
might
no,
pest you
before
sooner than
then
that.
is also
Okay.
cool too. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So
Cool. Because yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about this. But I had um one more question, and
yeah.
before you go, and you can say no, I won't be offended at all if you do. I didn't know if I could pray for your feet or whatever that you have. That's probably,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't want to like, because I know it was and it still is an extreme sacrifice that you like an offering in that way that you went through all that. So I don't want to, if you feel one way or the other about it, I don't have to pray. But if you're okay with that, I
No,
don't mind.
it's pain.
Okay. All
It's
right.
not fun. I would, and any extra,
Okay.
energy in that direction, why that's a gift.
Okay.
I wouldn't say no to a gift, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that's the purest kind of gift, right? Because you're asking for healing. So
Yeah. Okay.
I said
Well,
thank you to that. Yeah.
can I pray right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. Father, we just come before you right now, and I just thank you for Wei. I thank you that she's your daughter, and you've created her, and I thank you for all the treasures that you put inside of her. The way you've held her in the palm of your hand and watched her grow and kept her all these years, and been with her through everything she's gone through and everything you've taught her, Father, and just thank you for everything that she's given back throughout her life, and um everything that she's given to her son, and I thank you for her heart, Lord, that you've molded it and shaped it, and you've designed her, Father, and imparted love through her. And I thank you for everything that she's brought to me. That it's just been a wonderful time that I've got to spend with her, and the time that she's offered right here, Father. And I just thank you that you have made her, Father, and you know her. And I just ask that you heal her body, any pain or any infirmity that is coming against her, to just leave her body right now. And I just thank you for your healing power to just flow through her. Um, to push out any affliction that is or anything that's coming against her to cause her any pain, and to just for total health and restoration. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
I don't do that often enough. I need to do it more. So
No, I appreciate it. And I don't talk about you know, some people don't know that like I go through chronic pain. I just don't make it something that I think it's that part of me that doesn't want to burden people that that I go through something. Not that it's wrong to share that stuff, right? Because
yeah,
I open and freely share other things. But so thank you for hearing that's something that I deal with. I
yeah, you're
appreciate it.
welcome. Yeah,
Yeah.
I dealt with pain for many years, and then God healed me of it. It's the only way I know how to describe it. Is God healed me of it because, you know, and so I know what that's like to have pain, and it's not fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not fun at all. Yeah.
Right. Especially when
So
you can't control when it comes and goes.
mhm,
It's an unpredictable beast, but
yeah. Well, I'll keep praying for you too. I will. I will. I'm not just saying it. I will. I'll too.
well, and I value it because I've appreciated that we've gotten to know each other, and so thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And
Well, look,
tell Luke it was wonderful getting to talk to him because, I enjoyed meeting Craig and Luke.
yeah, I will.
So,
I definitely will. So yeah, that I'll yeah, I'm sure he'll say the same. So I don't know what he wants,
yeah.
but I
And
can
feel free to drag me in if you feel like I have anything to share to any of your other discussions. Just
oh,
let me know.
if
Yeah,
you're open up that opportunity, you'll definitely get dragged in. I'm sure.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
we'd all love to pick your brain on more ideas. So do you have anything before I forget? Do you have anything like you want to share, like about your business or anything like want to?
I mean, I've actually got some stuff possibly coming up in the works. So, you know, if anybody wants to put good intention towards some growth there, hopefully I'll be able to create more of a community coming up in a gathering place and just create a spot that is a physical embodiment of inspiration. So, but I can't
That sounds
talk
really
about it
good.
too much because it's something that's
Keep
happening. So,
keep it secret, keep
but
it safe, sort of thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
we don't want to make it a reality before it's true yet.
It's
But
in the cauldron right now. Yeah. Let it
exactly, it's
brew.
brewing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, I'll link your, I guess, like your Instagram and things like that too, so people can find
Yeah.
you
And
too.
like I don't always have a ton of stuff on my website because I do so many shows.
Yeah.
And so I'm blessed that I have enough local and or committed customer repeat business that I'm not always having to populate my website. But
Yeah, that's
if
good.
people check out colorway.com or colorwayfiberarts.com, that's my website. And but yeah,
Buy some yarn.
yeah,
So,
I'm just around, just being me, doing and just, quietly listening. And then, if you have questions, I feel free. I will babble. So
yeah. Well, this has
yeah,
been great. Well, thank you so much
you're
once
welcome.
again.
You're welcome.
I
Yeah.
guess I'll end it here. Well,
All right. Well, and I'll look forward to hearing from you again soon.
okay, yeah, it'll be soon. All right. Have a good
All
night.
right.
Thanks
Night.
again.
Take care.